You're very welcome to the webinar. Why not sit down and relax and listen to the beautiful sounds and watch the scenes of our common home. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our webinar. We're so happy that so many of you have decided to join us for this evening, a new way of connecting for us. This is the special anniversary year of Laudato Si. And I think you can have seen that we live in such a beautiful place. We have an exciting evening lined up with amazing panelists who are all hidden and waiting to meet you. And at the end, we'll have a chance to meet everybody. Those of us who are here are looking forward to it, and we're going to touch on so many different themes, not maybe in huge depth, but it's the start as we try to cultivate hope in so many different ways. Tonight, I'm delighted to welcome Lorna Gold. Lorna was our guest here last year for Season of Creation, and she's coming back to us this year in a different way from the safety of her home up in Maynooth. Lorna will be well known to many of you, and she's the author of that wonderful book called Climate Generation. I knew her for many years because I knew her face on the television screen when she was working with Trócaire as their policy officer. Then I got to know her through the Laudato Si working group, of which she's the vice chair. And many of you will know her because she has another job, which is that of parenting. And during the summer, Lorna, I think you were very busy. You were a homeschooler, or you were the mom, you were the teacher. And then she took off on a trip around the wild Atlantic way. So Lorna, thank you. And we're looking forward to hearing from you as you help us to cultivate hope at this time of so many challenges.
Thanks, Sylvia. And it's such a joy to be back with the virtual Kerry J.P.I.C, and then all the other groups that have been able to join us for this webinar tonight. So what I'm going to do is just set the scene a little bit, bring us into this idea of cultivating hope. I think we can all agree that we're living in the strangest of times. 2020 has been a year like no other. At times, we might all wonder what's going to happen next. Between the growing climate crisis, the broader ecological crisis, the pandemic, the madness we see in terms of political projects like Brexit, and we don't know what will happen in the US elections. And then on top of that, there's a mounting sense that there's a growing financial crisis. And if businesses can't get back to some kind of normal running, governments won't be able to bail them out for much longer. So as we're heading towards winter, I get a sense of a gathering storm clouds in our world. And in the midst of all of this, of course, there's huge suffering. And my heart in particular goes out to one group who might be forgotten in all of this, and that's young people. The young people of our world in particular who stood up for climate justice just 1 year ago. Just a year ago, we were all on the streets, or many of us were, with the young people calling for urgent climate action. And for Greta Thunberg and those thousands of young people from Fridays for Future, this has been a particularly harrowing year. Yes, lockdown reduced our climate emissions temporarily, but the wider ecological crisis on which their future depends has been very much sidelined politically. This movement has shown remarkable leadership in not pursuing and gathering in crowds, but they've also had to face the reality of having to adapt and try to make pressure on governments in other ways rather than feet on the street, and that is not easy. In the face of this, there's plenty of reasons to despair. This year, many of us have felt, those of us struggling for climate action, have felt a sense of powerlessness, with so many crises starting to intertwine. Just think about those recent pictures of the forest fires and the hurricanes and people wearing face masks. People trying to respond to one crisis whilst in the middle of adapting and protecting themselves from another. The problems seem just too big and the responses too late. So in the midst of all this madness, we're here tonight to focus on hope, on cultivating hope. Are we a bit mad to hope at this time? For many people, the self-preservation reaction to this desperate situation of 2020 has been to close down and switch off. I think many people are doing that right now. And if we want to talk about hope, I think we need to do so in more of a glib, it has to be more than a glib kind of hope. It can't be a gloss of optimism, which seems to deny the basic facts of where the world is at. Our planet and our civilization at this point are on a life support. That is the facts. So where can we find hope? If you're here tonight, it's because that's what interests you. We urgently need to find hope in ourselves, in each other, and in the world around us. I think the first step of moving to a deeper hope is about acceptance of the reality we're in. This is as much about a learning of the heart as it is about our heads. We know so much factually, but we need to allow this to seep into us, to hold that sense of things falling apart, and to let it wash over us. Hope, after all, is a paradox. In the Christian story, as in other mystical traditions, hope teaches us the universal truth that can only be experienced to be fully understood. It's an experience that darkness, if held close and even embraced, can be a passageway which leads to a deeper reality. In Christianity, we call it the cross and the resurrection. Christian hope is born from that experience of the cross. But moving from darkness into light, from death to life, hope, despair to hope is a continuous journey, and we can be thrust back into darkness and doubt, many times unexpectedly. Many of us have experienced this during the lockdown time. Yet as much as we are thrust into despair, we also witness the miracle of compassion and loving action reborn and growing in equal measure. This is why, to me, the idea of cultivating hope is so important. We need to choose what part of which story and which future we want to be part of. Do we want to embrace the story of falling apart? Or do we want to see this as the time of the great turning, as Joanna Macy called it? It's almost like we need to create an ecosystem around us as a means to lift each other out of the darkness. It's very difficult to do on our own. We need to find others who can help us inhabit the future that we so desperately want to have. As Pope Francis says in Laudato Si, in this respect, our small actions take on a great significance. We need to create the conditions, the soil, the water, the sunshine that will help the seeds of hope to germinate in our hearts, in our communities, and in our world. Nature can teach us so much when it comes to hope. During lockdown, I decided to focus on my garden like never before, and to start a little patch of growing my own food. That little patch of earth And those tiny seeds planted together with my boys have become giant sunflowers, tomatoes, dahlias, strawberries, attracting all sorts of birds, insects, bees, butterflies. Everything in that garden speaks to me of hope. Every time I look out the window now, I see a little miracle that I helped perhaps to bring into being. I literally become hopeful when I look outside. That sense of maternal protection and responsibility reminded me of the beautiful encounter I had with Pope Francis with the board of the Catholic Climate Movement just before lockdown. Pope Francis, after our meeting, wanted to show us a picture of a tapestry that was in the next room. The tapestry showed two hands and God as the mother birthing the universe with a newborn baby. He said to us that this is how we all need to be now, to become mothers, full of tenderness in our actions towards each other and God's creatures. The image stuck with me, and it made me wonder how we can help our world to be reborn, how we can sow hope in our lives and in our communities. Hope, after all, is not something static. Hope, for me, is active. It's something we do, the direction of travel, a path we create, and we start by being here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorna. And you have just spoken to us as like a perfect introduction to our next speaker, calling us to action, and that with action comes hope. Lorna, we're going to meet you again at the end, but right now I'd like to introduce Niamh. Around Kerry, we often hear the word biodiversity. And if we ever hear the word biodiversity, a couple of names come to mind. One of them is always Niamh, and Niamh, you're so welcome, because Niamh is a facilitator and a teacher and a friend and a companion and somebody who saves seeds, helps me enormously, has helped even my parish, as she will tell us in a minute. She's involved in the Transition Kerry workshops at the moment, the training courses that are slightly paused because of COVID. Hopefully they'll get going again. That are happening all over Kerry. So Niamh, we asked her to speak about what is this biodiversity and why is it so important and how can we do it? Thank you, Niamh.
Hi, Sylvia. It's lovely to be here this evening. And I'm going to be talking a bit about, as Sylvia said, about biodiversity. I suppose I'm here to talk about maybe what is biodiversity, why is it important, and how can we work with biodiversity and bring it more into our parishes and our own gardens and communities. So I start with this slide. I put some pictures together and I love this one because it's Oscailge is Trá Flúirse sa Chordine, which means when we work with biodiversity and with nature, there's always plenty. So there's a lot of abundance. And I suppose the other thing is we try to keep it simple and the approaches, there's no one way to do this. So I'll start with what is biodiversity, and it's actually two words, biological diversity. And I suppose when we were growing up, we knew it as nature, but I suppose biodiversity is a broader term, and it's really the variety of all living things and our interconnections. And it's like the web of life, and we are part of this web of life. And to keep it very simple, there's a few different levels of biodiversity. So they can be at the genes level. So like we're all humans, but we have different varieties in our genes. Then you can have it with species. So it could be, there's different species of butterflies, or different species of bees or trees. And then there's also diversity within habitats and ecosystems. So habitats would be where, you know, the plants and animals and us, where we live. And ecosystems would be bigger areas, things like, you know, forests and bogs, and rivers and oceans. So this is like the biological diversity that's all around us on the earth. So I suppose the next thing we'd look at is why it's important. And in this case, we'd be looking at why is it important to bring it into our communities. So biodiversity, actually, it's like the life support for us and the whole earth and everything that lives on the earth. So, and listening to Lorna earlier there, it gives us clean soil, it gives us clean air and water. It helps regulate and stabilize the climate. So it's actually one of the big buffers that we have to protect us from extreme weather and storms and flooding. It's the great recycler. It recycles everything. There's no waste in nature. So constantly, but it's invisible to us most of the time, it's recycling nitrogen, carbon, oxygen, and turning it into other things. And these are the kind of miracles that Lorna was mentioning earlier. It's the magic that happens. So we just don't see it, or we maybe take it for granted. Biodiversity, it also helps maybe things like storing carbon and water. So maybe one of the ecosystems in Ireland and Kerry that we often would undervalue would be the bog. And bogs hold huge amounts of water, and they also, to help prevent flooding downstream, and also they're a habitat for loads of creatures as well. Biodiversity helps us with pollination. So in terms of our food and seeds, hugely important. And that's for wild plants as well as cultivated. And I suppose it is that biodiversity, when an ecosystem, when there's lots of biodiversity, there is stable ecosystems, and that's usually, that's a sign of healthy communities, and that's also in terms of human communities. We are healthier when the biodiversity around us is healthy. So, and I suppose again, it is our common home, and also it has its own intrinsic right to exist. All these creatures, they're not just here for us to use, and that's probably what's happened in the past. And you can see there that slide where we've shrank the wild areas. And so this is one of the things that we need to look at, is how can we create more wild areas and wild spaces in our parishes and communities. So we should always start on our own doorstep, in our own gardens and homes, and then within church grounds or parish centres or school grounds, anywhere in the community there's space for biodiversity. And the big thing would be thinking global and acting local. It's a really important part of it. And knowing that everything is connected, and our food, biodiversity, climate, everything, they're all connected to each other. You can't really think of them in isolation. So the first thing we do is don't do anything first. Really, it's just observe. What do we already have? A lot of people think they have to run out to the garden centre or run off to the shops and buy things and dig things up and do things. But actually the best thing to do is actually stop. And often we tell people for a year, watch what happens, and maybe do a bit of different mowing for a while, and you might suddenly be surprised that there's actually a lot of wild plants or wild insects if you actually allow the habitats and the plants to grow for them to come in. Change our attitude, that's a big part of it. Some people would see what is a weed, for other people it's a wildflower, but it also could be a medicine. This is a lovely example of Clogher's church, where I would have met with Sylvia and Ger, the caretaker, and we just noticed that there was oxeye daisies and yarrow, but they were all really small in the grass being mowed. So then we talked to the caretaker, and we, showed him different ways of mowing, and he took it on and created lovely little wildflower patches. And in the grassy area, they also planted some fruit trees. So it's just, again, looking at different ways of using, instead of having just grass, you can actually have a huge amount of diversity very quickly. That was with doing nothing except mowing differently and planting a few trees. The next step would be making a simple plan for maybe the church grounds or the parish centre grounds or your own garden. And the habitat could include like a native hedge, some trees, like a little woodland if you've space, fruit trees, log piles, wildflower meadows, some compost area, and possibly a little pond if possible. So just, it's actually more where biodiversity is at its most, is where one edge of a habitat meets another one. So it's where the hedge meets the meadow, or the meadow meets the pond. That's where you'll notice the buzzing and all the insects and everything going on. So, and to create a little simple nature trail to walk from one place to the other. So do less. That's a big thing. Humans seem to want to run out and do things all the time. So here you can see in Ballymacalligot, which is down just outside Tralee here, where Sylvia and other people, they would have planted this tree, a birch tree, and they mulched it. Instead of keeping the soil bare around the tree, they actually mulched it with cardboard and then covered it with bark mulch and leaves, and then put stones around it. So again, it's about using instead of things that might be seen as waste, we use them to make soil instead of digging up the soil the whole time. And then also to plant perennials and biennials and annuals all mixed up together is way better for all the insects, and to leave wild corners. That's a really simple one as well. Use local resources. So try not to go off buying things. We usually are throwing out one thing and then buying another thing. But if you keep things like leaves, grass clippings, logs and stones, you can use them in your garden in different ways. And collecting local seeds, really important to spread more wildflowers around. And I suppose we would encourage no chemical sprays, because there's no point in spraying when you're inviting insects into your garden as well. And also using the buildings or sheds to collect rainwater. Again, hugely simple action, but really important to do. So the other thing is, most people it's really good to start with small habitats. So there's a small little pond, which is just made out of a basin, and it's hidden by rocks. And then I hid it with some logs as well, so it's screened away. So the logs and twigs might have been thrown away, but actually by doing there's actually, by doing this simple things. Choose native wild plants if possible, so things like yarrow and meadowsweet, mullein and coltsfoot. These are just 4 examples of wild native plants that will come back year after year, or that will set seed. And a lot of these are disappearing as we get rid of our habitats. So if we can bring these back into our parishes and our own home grounds, they are really important in terms of insects as well. The other one would be to choose native trees and hedges. So the rowan, really important at this time of the year with all the berries for the birds. And the ivy, if you notice it at the moment, it's actually going to flower, and the bees are really humming around it because the temperatures are up, and that'll turn into berries, and those berries actually keep the blackbirds fed through the winter as well. So again, ivy, brambles, gorse, often plants that people think they want to take them out and put in ornamentals, but actually they are the food that the insects and all the birds and other creatures need. And elder, this gorgeous elderflower, at the moment the elderflower is in berry, but again, hugely important, the amount of insects and animals and creatures that they feed. And for us, they can also give us medicine. It's called the poor man's cold and flu remedy, a fabulous. And in a small garden or place, you could have that as a hedge as well. So these would be other plants that are really valuable for pollinators. So some of you would have them, especially if you're growing vegetables in your garden, because you want to attract pollinators in. So nasturtiums, calendula, borage, evening primrose, and mint. These are just a few examples, but these are all edible, medicinal, and humming with insects at the moment. You'll notice if you have them in your garden. And they look lovely as well, full of colour. So the other thing would be to share either your interest or your knowledge. So education is really important in raising awareness, and you could maybe set up a group if you're involved in your parish. You could set up a care of creation group locally, or you might also just create seating with logs or with seats outside so that people can enjoy the space to sit in nature. And maybe on the notice boards, put up signs about what you're doing. And I suppose this work is all linked as well to the Sustainable Development Goals, or the global goals, which are kind of a way to create the future that we want to live in. And there's a lot of work in that to do with climate action and biodiversity, protecting life on land and life in the sea. So again, everything's connected in this work. So I suppose I'll be finishing up here with everything is alive. To remember when you're looking out your window, as Lorna said, and you start realizing that everything in the garden is alive. And I suppose to final, with words of wisdom, nothing in nature lives for itself. And that's the thing with ecosystems, they're constantly working together and interacting. And we are part of this ecosystem. So the more we can do in our own homes, our own parishes and parish centres, the better. And that's it, Gor Mahagaib. And I look forward to hearing the other people speaking.
And Niamh, Mila Mila Buyakas. You can see that Niamh could stay on for the evening, and we'd all love to hear her. And she has done so much for our own individual little parish out there in Ballymac. And there are different parishes doing different things. Here in Tralee, now I'm living in Ballymacalligot, but there are 2 St. John's parishes in Tralee. There's one on Castle Street and then there's one on Ash Street. And so I'm going to welcome David Tuff. I became aware of what was going on. There was something else going on in the grounds. So David, you're a lay reader and you work with some of the children in the school and in the parish, particularly the Boys Brigade. So David, do you want to tell us what you decided to do and what in fact you did?
Thank you, Sylvia, for that introduction. Yes, David is my name. I'm a diocesan lay reader in the Church of Ireland. And first of all, I'd like to thank you for the invitation to take part in this webinar on behalf of Reverend Canon Jim Stevens, our rector. So there I am in my robes on a Sunday morning. So I go to St. John the Evangelist in Ash Street, but it's a group of parishes in Tralee and Dingle in the Diocese of Limerick, Ardfert and Killaloe. Now, one priest in charge of the parish can't be everywhere, so we have a number of lay people like myself trained up and commissioned to take services as part of the ministry. Now, one of the Anglican Communion's mission commitments is to strive to safeguard the integrity of creation and to sustain and renew the life of the earth. And parishes are becoming more and more engaged with environmental issues, including climate change and biodiversity. So in our parish, we have a company of the Boys Brigade, one of the earliest Christian uniformed organisations. And despite its name, we have girls and boys in 2 age groups, 5 to 8 years and 8 to 12 years. And they do a varied programme of physical, spiritual, community, interest and adventure activities. And one of the projects has been developing this biodiversity garden or project in the church grounds. And here's some of the boys and girls seen here with myself, Bishop Kenneth Kieran and Bishop Ray Brown, Archbishop Clark, Reverend Canon Jim Stevens, the rector, and Mrs. Colette Price, who's the leader of the Boys Brigade. Here they are with their beach garden, where they have displaying some of the plants and attractions of our wonderful beach areas, and we've plenty of those around Kerry. One of the earlier projects was a bug hotel. This is an area designed to attract various insects. Old pallets were stacked and the gaps filled with various materials to develop different habitats for the insects. And the children were able to study the insects using microscopes and then put them safely back into their hotel. We called it the B&B, the Boys Brigade Bug Bed and Breakfast. And then to attract all the insects, we developed some wildflower areas in the school and in the church grounds. Both are adjoining each other. That's St. John's Parochial School and St. John's in Ash Street. And the idea then is to plant wildflowers to attract all the insects. And then there's a number of bird feeders and bird boxes around the grounds as well. And during the lockdown period, when the boys and girls weren't able to meet together for their usual activities, they were kept busy with various projects, including making some bee feeders, which you can see here. And then at the end, only this week, we had a nature photo competition where they all submitted their photographs of nature. A wonderful display of flowers and insects in different habitats. And we judged that nature photography competition. And then to bring it to people's attentions, we have this, what we call, some people call the bee wall. Bee friendly is the slogan, and it's planted with pollinator friendly plants. And it has some bee and insect houses up on the wall, and these were made by the boys and girls themselves. So these are just some of the ways in which we are encouraging biodiversity in the care for God's creation. So thank you very much.
David, don't disappear just for a minute. I'd love to say a huge thank you, but to ask you, can we, if we see the gates open, take a little wander in to have a look?
Oh, of course, and usually the gates are open while the school is open during the day.
So this is Ash Street. It's the same street as where the courthouse is, and it's further up the street on the way to the little roundabout.
Yes.
In on your left. It looks like an absolute treasure, David. Thank you for sharing it.
Well, all the ideas we got earlier on there from Neve were great, so we'll try and incorporate some of those. Great.
You see, we're all connected on this. And now I have another guest to introduce, and that is Mary.
Hi, so.
Mary Burke. Mary Burke lives out at Derrymore East. And during the time when we were allowed to go a certain distance, I was able to go out to visit Mary, you, in your home and in your garden and have a little tour. And Mary, thank you for joining us. And I wondered, what kind of made you get involved in this in the first place? All of this living sustainably and gardening and living gently.
I'll probably give you a very long answer, but first of all, yeah, thanks very much for inviting me to take part, and it's great to have listened to everybody so far. Really inspiring. So yeah, as regards what prompted my interest? Well, I suppose initially I lived in Germany for a few years in the 90s, and it was, everybody was very, I suppose, environmentally aware there. I spent a summer in India, then ended up, the very opposite end of the spectrum. We had people, very, very conscious of how to use their waste, reuse waste. So that was very inspiring. And then coming back to Ireland and then moving from the east of the country down to Kerry, I found that I kind of really needed to kind of find a sense of place for myself, because I had lived in a lot of cities, and then suddenly I'm in the country and, just trying to settle in. So I probably, living then in West Kerry in the Gaeltacht, well, just very close to the Gaeltacht, I found that I was able to kind of pursue my love of the Irish language once again, and did a number of courses. And some of those courses involved going hill walking while using the Irish language. So I felt a real sense of connection then to the landscape through the language. And that then in turn kind of just gave me a sort of a sense of grounding in my new home. And then I suppose shortly after that, I got to know Transition Kerry people, who were like really, really supportive and, introducing us to the whole idea of biodiversity. I hadn't heard of it, I suppose, really before meeting Niamh. And then more recently, I suppose, reading Monica McGann and Michael Cronin's book, Irish and Ecology. It's just really kind of given me a sense of place. So now I kind of equate having a sense of place as being something that's very grounding, and feeling more grounded then in turn sort of helps you to live or want to live more sustainably.
And so Mary, I see that you're going to bring us on a little tour. The name of your house is Coombrack, which we've seen in the plaque on the wall. Yeah. And so maybe you'll talk us through as we wander through your garden.
Okay, well,
so there's Coombrack.
Yeah. So Clonbrack is the name of a lake that's in the mountains behind us. So that was a nice connection. And yeah, here, so you're seeing my very first cucumber plant, which is probably, yeah, I found it really a great experience to finally start growing some plants. So they were inside, and I suppose during the lockdown in particular, they gave me kind of a great sense of, yeah, sense of well-being. And at the same time, you know, I felt, yeah, it's great to be kind of producing something that you can actually eat. And yeah, I kind of miss them now that they've kind of had their time. It's like missing a pet I've been nurturing for quite a while. So
But you've obviously, I should interrupt you for a minute, you obviously like salads. Look at these.
yeah, so that was, I've always grown some salads and herbs, so I kind of decided to try some tomatoes this year. So tried a couple of different varieties, both inside and outside. So it was really nice for the kids, you know, for all of us to be able to kind of just at lunchtime go over to the plants and you know, pick our lunch. And I suppose it, you know, lets them see that, you know, food doesn't just come from a supermarket. So yeah.
And then you were outside, so now we're moving outside. Oh, this looks a little like what happened in Clogher Church.
Yeah, it's very
Did you plant these?
Yeah.
Did you plant these,
Not
Mary?
at all. No. So they just, we're kind of, I suppose, lazy gardeners. And we saw that they had started to take root and flower. And so now we just see that these oxeye daisies are just kind of creating a really lovely natural border for us. So yeah, we don't mow them. And actually even this evening, just to calm my nerves before this, I actually was able to go outside and pick a few still and a few other flowers that are just growing because we let them grow. They're not cultivated.
But Mary, if I may say something again, you also have children. And so with a boy in the house, presumably there might well be a bit of football. So you need a bit of lawn.
Sure, yeah. We definitely, living in Kerry, you know, it's kind of obligatory to have the space for the for the football. So yeah, we mow some of it, and then we allow some wilding in different areas, like Niamh was saying. In fact, Niamh gave us a lot of advice when we moved here first, and she was also responsible for planting this really great hedge, and there's a very small woodland as well of native trees. So we've got rowan, hazel, alder, ash and oak, everything. So
And Mary, does that have a double function because you live on a very busy road?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, so it can be very busy because we live on the road to Dingle. So all through the summer, there's a lot of traffic on the road, and it gives a great you know, it really screens out the sound of the traffic. So that's, yeah.
And you cut it in a special way.
Yeah, it's again, we had yeah, it's kind of cut in an A shape, which, you know, does I suppose a lot less damage to the hedge, and we always try to cut it in at the end of October, start of November. So yeah, it keeps it very healthy, very lush, and yeah, we're very proud of it.
And now there is the little problem of perennial things that you don't want or waste,
yeah,
or
sure.
what you might call weeds.
Yeah, so we have a compost heap, and yeah, we just keep filling it, and it's the compost heap that just keeps on giving, you know. So we were, you know, I was able to use the compost to plant the veg this summer, so, and in previous summers as well. And
so Mary, would you say that you're doing amazing things? When I spoke to you, you kind of said, I'm only doing baby steps. But, you know,
yeah,
it's a lot of little baby steps that look quite big to me.
Well, I think,
and
you know,
you're busy. You have another life because you have to go to town.
Sure, yeah. I mean, we kind of adopt the, I suppose, as Paul McCartney would say, the let it be approach. You know, we just let things grow. We like to let the nettles grow in the borders. We have nothing against weeds. So when we if weeds come up in the gravel in the driveway, I suppose you can't let them take over, but we just kind of pour boiling water on them or just dig them out as they appear. So yeah, it's the kind of
but you do have to travel to town.
Yeah, we do actually. Yeah, so we're about 10 minutes from town, so which means quite a lot of trips for school and work and various activities, but we try to consolidate the trips and just to minimize them really.
And then I know that you work in the IT, and there was some project that we'll just move along and see. Just look, see, you can see what we can see. I saw all of this in the summer.
Oh yeah.
It was just a pleasure to be there. A pleasure, Mary, to be there. And that's the hedge and a bit of a lawn. And there's just another picture going to come up. Look, what on earth is this?
Well, this, a few of us got together last year and we set up a Green Campus Committee, and we just decided, first of all, to focus on reducing the use of single-use cups. So what we did here was we gathered a lot of used cups and we suspended them. And the cups, the number of cups here represent the number of cups that a person would create, or the waste a person would create over a 12-week semester if they were having 2 cups of tea or coffee a day. So yeah, it generated, quite a lot of interest. The students kind of really interacted with it. They sort of, you could see them kind of reaching up to hit them as they went along, and we had various kind of posters telling people how much money they could save if they brought their own keep cup. So in some buildings we actually kind of raised the use of keep cups by about 20% over the semester. So we're quite happy with that.
In Kerry we have wonderful poets, and one of them is Breed Ní Mhórán. Breed Ní Mhórán lives in camp, and she's very aware of the chain of life and what is happening to the chain of life. So Breed is going to read her poem in Irish and in English. So Breed, let us listen to your poem.
Sláire na batha. Nuair a tháinig tost glór na fisiúige, an tráine, an chorlúin dúchais, ní dúramir feic. Nuair a bhailmhigh ceol na mílta mór a tháinig I dír, a molla glán de fleisteach, ní dhéanamir feic. Nó na raibh clos ghodán nameach, go nimíadar gan tásc gan túrisc. Bhí bag beánnartha. Nuair a hosnig na slúite, a fáil bháis timpeall Wuhan na Síne, chola ráflaí ón imigéin. Nuair a leach an sciúis a chrónach, go dtí Lombardy na Hidáile, thugamir clúas le héisteacht do statistici, agus í cnaga ghós a bhainte na héireann, sin íata leistigh, éistíimiad le glórtha na górsan sa hiúnas. Chain of life. When sound of lark, corncrake, and native curlew fell silent, we said nothing. When music of whales died, and they beached bellies full of plastic, we did nothing. When humming of bees was no longer heard, and they disappeared without trace, we weren't bothered. When many began to succumb around Wuhan, China, rumours reached us from far away. When the corona scourge spread to Lombardy and Italy, we paid attention to statistics. As it knocks on Irish doors, and we ourselves are locked inside, we listen to the neighbours' voices in the quietness.
listening in the quietness. Thank you, Breed. Lorna reminded us that some of the people who are speaking the loudest are young people, even younger than me. And I'm delighted to welcome Judith. Judith, thank you for joining us this evening, because I met Judith last September 20th. We both shared the bandstand down in the square in Tralee on the Global Day of Climate Action. She was the younger person that day, and I was representing, in a way, the older generation. Judith, what would you like to share and say to us tonight? Because we need to listen.
Thank you so much, everybody, for joining in. I'm filled with so much hope to see so many people log in and breed Visha and Gaheven like our Mil Mahaga. Thank you so much for inviting me to participate, Sylvia. It is such a privilege to be able to write a few lines in this love letter to the earth on behalf of young people. I suppose, as a young person who is being left this colossal, chaotic mess of a climate crisis to deal with, it is so easy to feel outraged, frustrated, and even depressed at this injustice, because it really is heartbreaking to see the wonderful earth that I love and cherish, and that hopefully my own future children will be able to love and cherish, being destroyed by greed and ignorance. And like when I feel this way, I just remember how extremely lucky I am that I happen to live in this part of the world, because I don't know what it is like to be living in a place like sub-Saharan Africa or a tiny Pacific coastal community where their people and animals are already suffering the catastrophic effects of the climate crisis. Their rights and livelihoods are being grossly compromised by the developed world. And I suppose I feel, as a citizen of a wealthy country and as a human being, that it is my responsibility to try and bring about change. And I'd like to channel this anger into positive action to create hope through the Fridays for Future Tralee regional group. I decided to join this group last September to help organise climate strikes. I think they really help to raise awareness about climate change among ordinary people, and of course to remind our politicians that we're in the middle of an existential emergency. But of course, a few months ago, with the coronavirus and everything, we all knew it was quite selfish to go out physically into the streets and strike, putting lives at risk. So we decided to take our activism online. So we joined the hashtag digital strike, or the Stalk Digitach Oscailga. And we also created a virtual Earth Day celebration on the 24th of April. So we got our friends and people around Tralee to send us pictures of themselves holding up a sign for Earth Day, and pictures of themselves doing things for the earth, doing nice things for the earth, and pledges to the earth. And currently we are trying to plan for the 25th of September on Global Day of Climate Action, and we are really, really excited about this. And just for any young people watching, Fridays for Future is just such a fantastic movement to get involved in. Like, it's changed my life completely. And we are always looking for new recruits, so please don't hesitate to message us at all. And another great initiative that primary and secondary school children all around the country are taking is the Eco-UNESCO Young Environmentalist Awards. This is a competition where groups of young people carry out an action project to help the environment. Myself, my classmates, this is an action. So like if you were standing by in climate change, you were contributing negatively to it. So the two main things that we decided to focus on were the things that we teenagers actually have control over in our lives, which is what we wear and what we eat. So we organised meat-free Mondays in school, and we set up a competition for the most creative meat-free lunch. And we also got the canteen to stop selling meat on that day, which was a huge achievement, and everybody was on board with it. And to talk about sustainable fashion, we set up swap shops to help our peers to shop more consciously and sustainably. But the best thing about the Young Environmentalist Awards, however, is how it really gets you to properly plan your project or campaign, and that it really helps enhance its impact on your community. And they also have these brilliant ideas fests that they host. They're like regional workshops where you pitch your project to climate experts and to other schools, and you get so many tips on how to improve it. And you also get amazing vegan fruit food, which is great. And you're also rewarded for your efforts with a native tree to plant, which is always a plus. But while actions like these are extremely positive, we young people are unfortunately not the policymakers. So it is so important for all humanity's sake for the adults to step up, tell the truth, and take action. We need adults and politicians not only to listen to us, but to actually take us seriously instead of just praising us and then conveniently forgetting. Because we are literally fighting for our lives here and our future children's lives, and your future children's lives, and your grandchildren's future children's lives. The climate emergency is not something that will hit in about 30 years' time. It is already well on its way, destroying the lives of those least responsible for this crisis. We hear it all the time. We only get one life, one planet, one chance to make an impact. Please, please make yours a positive one. Thank you.
Judith, thank you so much. Sobering words and challenging words. Judith is the fifth-year student in Mercy Mount Hawk here in Tralee. You've actually met her mother already. Did you know that? The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Mary Burke is her mother. Thank you, Judith, and hopefully we will join you again in September, if we're allowed, even if only to be in the back. Thank you, Judith. And now I'm going to take you on to something completely different. Maybe it's something very basic, but we know that if you go to Skellig now and you see, what do you see up there? You see the nests with plastic. We see, as Bree told us, whales who are full of plastic. Who puts this into the sea? Is it you? You? Or is it me? It was basic, wasn't it? But it's something we can all do. And you know, there are signs with all of those, and they can be all put up in public toilets to remind us, because we can be so forgetful. Look, somebody else has joined us, and this is Bernie McCaffrey. And Bernie is going to tell us about something she has done. So Bernie, you're very welcome. Bernie McCaffrey, who lives out at Anna. Bernie, you moved into a house and you found the house was very, very cold. What did you do about it?
Yes, Sylvia, we moved into a bungalow which was built in the 1970s, and obviously very different building regulations to now. So a cold house, and we knew that we'd have to make some renovations to it. It was actually the lowest grade you can get on the BEAR, which is the building energy rating. So we're on the bottom of that. So our first step was trying to gather information and to decide what it was we needed to do. I was a member of the local sustainable energy group, so I got information there, and also spoke to people who were more experienced in this whole area of managing sustainable energy. And through that, we also had an opportunity to join into the Community Energy Grant scheme under SEAI, the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland. So we began with an energy assessment from Kingdom Installation, who specialise in renewable energy solutions. So they came, visit us, listen to what we had to say about our difficulties around the house, what we'd like to do, and also that we were concerned about our care for the earth, and that we weren't going to do anything that was going to cause any more harm to that. So they came up with a report, and they suggested that we would take 11 measures. Now, it was a little bit more than we were expecting, bigger project than we'd anticipated, but they would be coordinating the whole project, and so that made it a little less daunting.
But you had to move out, Bernie, that's true. Did you have to move out of the house?
Well, one of the measures was around removing our floors. We had suspended wooden floors, which they don't do anymore, and we had a problem with one of them. And so their solution was actually take them out altogether, dig down into the foundations, lay new solid floor. And while we were doing that, why wouldn't we put in underfloor heating? And why wouldn't we change our heating system to an air to water heat pump? So all of those kind of suggestions came in this plan. When we thought about it, and we knew that their advice was good, it was like, if you're doing it, you might as well do it all together. And the best way to do it was move out while they would carry out all this work. A small digger had to come into the house and dig down into the foundations. That was the most disruptive part. So we moved out for 10 weeks. And I mean, we were very lucky. I have a friend who was just invaluable and offered us the use of her house while we were out of our own house. So that was wonderful. I mean, it was difficult at the time. It was kind of very disruptive. But now that it's all over and you kind of forget about all that hassle, and we're just delighted. We just can't believe, you know, the change in the house, the comfort in the house. It has all worked out so well for us at this stage. And I suppose
you made a little movie. Someone made a little movie for you.
We've been taking photographs during the process as we moved from a G rate up to a B1 rate.
B1.
Yeah. So that was the big move. And as a result of that and all that work that we carried out, it meant that we moved from reducing our carbon emissions from 120 to 15 in a year. So that was a huge change that we're absolutely thrilled about. And also that resulted in lower running costs. So we have a number of photographs that would just show the process. Now, not everybody would be changing their floors, so don't be dismayed when you see all the rubble that had to come out of the house and all the changes that had to happen.
Thank you so much, and good to know that you're living lightly on the earth and that other people can take up this SEAI grant as you did. We have another voice that we're going to listen to. But first, you know, before we even talk to Aisling, we're going to watch something that she did. Already Judith has spoken to us about our clothes and our fashion. And, you know, we have Pope Francis, who speaks sometimes very poetically, but also very bluntly. And he's reminded us that we live in a throwaway culture. And last year, in fact, it was really 2020, there was a competition for schools, young journalists, and a young woman from Kenmare, a young student, Aisling Rochford, entered that and was the prize winner. She's the director of this film. So watch the film and we'll have a little word with her afterwards. And, you know, we're going to take ourselves out of this picture. We'll both turn off our videos now.
The fashion industry is the second most polluting industry on this earth, more polluting than aviation and shipping combined. We must tackle this and reduce our fast fashion consumption. Here is 7,500 litres of water, the amount it takes to produce a single cotton t-shirt.
We have the politicians these days. They say they're going to do stuff, they promise us all this stuff, but once again, like always, they never keep their promises, and sure, the whole world will be dead within a few years if these lads don't, you know, start doing something.
There's only time in it.
Yeah.
We're going to reduce, reuse and recycle our clothes, buying better quality and second-hand clothing, swap shops and more. Us as a school and Kenmare as a community, let's reduce our fast fashion consumption.
What a wonderful film, Aisling. Congratulations for being a director. That was a 1-minute video. And what gave you the idea?
Well, I suppose I've been interested in the idea of fast fashion and like how it contributes so negatively, I suppose, to our planet, and I suppose the human side of it, and the fact that we're just buying, you know, all these clothes. I suppose I focused in on the idea of the t-shirt, and I wanted to show, I suppose, visually, and you have that image in there of all the, you know, all of my fellow students and everything up against all of these tanks of water, and there, you know, there's some sitting on some of them and everything, and that's just the amount it takes to produce one. And you're trying to think of, you know, how many you would buy in a year, how many you would buy just on a single shopping trip.
You're a 6th-year student now in Pobbleskull in Verstena. Was it difficult to get your fellow students to come in as actors or actresses?
And no, they were very obliging. Like they really got into the project. I suppose I kind of like, we wanted to kind of catch that kind of, we didn't want to prepare them. So I just kind of told them, look, we're doing a video. Would you be interested? And I explained some of the basics, but I kind of didn't, I wanted them to be very kind of shocked, I suppose, at the idea of, you know, how many litres of water it really took. And, you know, they were like, I wanted it as well just to be like, you know, obviously you get so much on the video, but I wanted them themselves to just stand there and be told, you know, that's how much it takes to produce just one single cotton t-shirt. And honestly, we had such a, you know, it took, like, that video is only a minute long, but it took, you know, 4 or 5 hours to film the whole thing. But we had a lovely like day. It was a very enjoyable experience.
Aisling, thank you so much. And you're the last voice in a way, even though Lorna is going to speak after you. Wish you well in this final year and wish you well in your future career. And I'm sure you'll be out in September as well.
Yeah, perfect.
On the Global Day.
Yeah, thank you.
Just talking to everybody now for a minute. I realize that we're running a little bit behind time. Thank you for your patience in staying with us. And Lorna, you want to say a last little word to us before we have a moment of reflection?
Thanks, Sylvia. It's how do you follow all of that is really what I wanted to say. But I don't know about all of you, but certainly I feel full of hope after this hour together. And what really occurs to me is how important these moments are in coming together. And perhaps now is really the time that we need to double down on our efforts to try to change attitudes and values and to use this opportunity. Some of us have a little bit extra time on our hands to really embrace the opportunity of COVID, to really care for our common home, for creation. I've got 3 takeaways from tonight, listening to the wonderful speakers who are just so inspiring, but also so practical. And I was writing down all my notes on things that I can do. The first one message that comes through loud and clear is this joy and the love of nature and creation, and how important that is for us, especially now, and where we're being restricted also in our social interactions. Use that time to fall in love again with the wonders of creation. I know I have, and I am every day now, just discovering that what Niamh said, everything's alive, that things that we took for granted, really embracing that connection with nature is so restorative. The second thing that I'm taking away is just the number of changes that we can all make, and the habits, the new habits that we can form. So there are so many things that we can do, and I was noting them all down, but I'll probably have to watch back to take all the notes on all the different things, on all the different ideas on the things that we can do. And then the third thing that strikes me is really comes from the two young people who spoke, but I think it's a lesson for all of us to take on. The importance of joining together as communities to speak out and to tell the truth. And this idea that we all need to make these changes, and that's the foundation for everything, but we also can't give up on the need to put this at the top of the political priorities. Just so important. And I really feel that on the 25th of September, this global day of action, which we imagine will be virtual, many of us who are in the older age groups and many new people in the older age groups have become quite savvy on the online stuff through lockdown. We need to mobilise people. We need to get the message out to politicians that this can't be sidelined any longer. It's so important that this is we need to do something urgently. And that is what hope's all about. I often think of people who are become involved in campaigns and struggles in the darkest of times, even during the Second World War, or the people who were involved in anti-apartheid movement. When they were full of hope, and I imagine that they were so busy doing things and being full of hope and changing the world that they were too busy to even notice the darkness. So I think that that's where we need to be, and it's been a great privilege to be with you this evening.
Lorna, thank you so much. It's nearly that time, and I hope that you have your candle ready, because we're going to light a candle to bring light into the darkness. But first, I just want to say a thank you to so many people. Those amazing scenes and sounds at the beginning, thanks to the wonderful photography of Carol Ryan, and the sounds all recorded by, who else? Father Pat Ahern. To Lorna herself, to Niamh, David, Mary Burke, to Breed the poet, Judith, to Bernie. Another person who is maybe a little bit hidden is Helen, who translated our leaflet into Irish, Helen Higgins. To Aisling, of course. To all of the people who worked behind the scenes. Des was answering your questions on the little chat function, and he's going to be, if you ever need to ask a question about J.P.I.C, you can contact him. And you can contact Lorna or Jane about the Laudato Si working group. Our own communications department in the diocese has been quite incredible. They have done so much for us, Mary Fagan and Paddy Brosnan. You can see there the contacts for Des Bailey at Diocese of Kerry, and for the Laudato Si working group, care of Jane. Our evening wouldn't be complete without bringing it to a close because there's been one woman in particular who's made it possible. Of course, you've never seen her at all. Well, you saw a photograph of her, but that was Jane Mellett. Jane Mellett has been our guide through all of this. She's our tech person. She's our support, our guide, our encourager. Thank you, Jane. You did a marvelous job. I was a bad timekeeper, I realize that, but there's always time for prayer. So let's light our candle. Let's have a little moment of reflection. There's my candle. This is the prayer for the 5th anniversary of Laudato Si, from the hand of Pope Francis. Could we all say it together? Loving God, creator of heaven and earth and all that is in them, you created us in your own image and called us to care for all your creation. You blessed us with the sun, water, and bountiful land so that all might be nourished. Open our minds and touch our hearts so that we may attend to your gift of creation. Help us to be conscious that our common home belongs not only to us, but to all of your creatures and to future generations, and that it is our responsibility to care for it. May we help each person secure the food and resources that they need. Be present to those in need, to those trying, especially the poorest, and to those most at risk of being left behind. Transform our feelings of fear and isolation into hope and intimacy, and may it bring about that true conversion of the heart. Help us to show creative solidarity in addressing the consequences of this global pandemic. Make us courageous to embrace the changes that are needed in search of the common good. Now more than ever, may we feel that we are all interconnected and interdependent. Enable us to listen and respond to the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. May the present sufferings be the birth pangs of a more fraternal and sustainable world. And may we do all of this under the loving gaze of Mary, help of Christians, and we make our prayer through Christ our Lord. Amen. Ihawa to everybody. And panelists, let's all say goodbye to everybody. Show yourselves. Slán to all of you. Ihawa.